Welcome to another Zoom program from the Dearborn Heights Libraries. Tonight, Dennis Fiems will be speaking about the lies perpetrated by the Holocaust deniers, entitled Lying About History. Dennis Fiems was a charter faculty member of Oakland Community College, where he taught world history for 42 years. During his career, he was selected 3 times as the Highland Lakes Campus Outstanding Faculty Member. Since his retirement, he has presented programs at the Adult Learning Institute, SOAR, and a number of libraries including White Lake, Highland, Shelby, Commerce, Chelsea, Farmington, Westland, and now with tonight's talk, Dearborn Heights. So without further ado, I give you Dennis Fiems.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Rob, and I'd like to thank the Dearborn Heights Libraries for having me. And I want to talk to you about a topic that's really very close to my heart, and that is the damage that the Holocaust deniers do. And I'd like to begin by having us think about this for a minute. Truth exists. Only falsehood has to be invented. We all recognize truth, but people do, in fact, invent any number of lies. And what I want to do is to begin by showing you some of the lies that I have found on the internet from holocaustdenier.com. Was Treblinka a transit camp on the way to Beverly Hills? Well, does this look to you like a transit camp on the way to Beverly Hills? In fact, the Nazis destroyed Treblinka, and they hoped the evidence of, or nearly all of the evidence of what they did there. They couldn't erase it all, but they tried. John Birdman Bryant wrote, "The Holocaust is a Jewish big lie." Holocaust truth, which is not in fact true. 4 million died at Auschwitz. The plaque was taken down due to it being untrue. The new plaque says only 1.5 million died at Auschwitz. Now I want to pause for a moment. Does that still seem to you like an outrageous number of people? 1.5 million? Only 1.5 million died at Auschwitz? Yet the 6 million figure remains the same. Where did the 4 million go? You know, it seems to me they're even bad at arithmetic. 4 million minus 1.5 million is 2.5 million. So Zundel's site, this is another Holocaust denier site. There is no proof that the Holocaust, as depicted by the Holocaust promotion lobby and the highly politicized Hollywood industry, actually occurred. Well, we'll see about that. The numbers of Holocaust victims are irresponsibly exaggerated, but now you see the transition from saying, well, there is no proof to, well, the numbers of victims are irresponsibly exaggerated. From the Institute of Historical Research, which isn't much of an institute and doesn't do much in the way of historical research, they actually went out of their way to denounce the sound of music. It distorts history. Remember towards the end where you have the Von Trapp family fleeing those Nazis? So that's, I suppose, where they're distorting history. Now, no survivors, some of the deniers say, claim they were murdered by the Nazis in the death camps. Well, that's like the old story, if an airplane crashes in Nebraska, but it was bound for California, where do you bury the survivors? Well, you don't bury survivors. Jean-Marie Le Pen, who is the founder of the National Front Party in France, which is now the 3rd largest party in France, what I said was what I think, that the gas chambers were a detail of the war, unless you accept that the war was a detail of the gas chambers, again, minimizing what occurred during the Holocaust. He was, because of those comments, he was suspended by the party he founded. Now, I do want you to be a little cautious as you search the internet, because there is a site, at least there was, the Landover Baptist Church, but which says extraordinarily outrageous things, but it was a satirical website. That is, they said things that they believed no intelligent person would believe. Google has a policy on this. Google offers a disclaimer. The word Jew is often used in an anti-Semitic context. We assure you that the views expressed by these sites in your results are not in any way endorsed by Google. So Google has gone out of their way to distance itself from the various deniers. Well, what is the Holocaust? Well, there's several ways to approach it. One of the most general ways is to say that the Holocaust was the genocide of European Jews and others by the Nazis, which took place from 1939 to 1945. Another term that's sometimes used, another Hebrew term, is Shoah, which means calamity. And again, I can't think of a better word. And it refers to the mass murder of European Jews by the Nazis during World War II. There were other victims as well, including homosexuals, the handicapped, the insane, those who were defined as unfit by Nazi standards, Jehovah's Witnesses because they would not swear loyalty to the state, political commissars, intellectuals, Roma, or as some would refer to them, gypsies, and many, many tens of thousands of prisoners of war. All of these died in German camps. And another definition of Holocaust is a sacrificial offering that is consumed entirely by flames. And when you think of it, so many of the 6 million were in fact consumed entirely by flames. It's important, I think, though, to remember what Alan Dershowitz observed some 25 years ago. While every victim of the Holocaust was not a Jew, every Jew was an intended victim. Now, the Holocaust is a highly technical, well-organized program using gas chambers and crematoria, among other implements and methods, that was implemented to kill millions of Jews. An estimated 6 million Jews were killed. There are probably, at a minimum, another 6 million victims of those other categories that I have mentioned above. There was an intention to commit genocide. There was an intention to wipe out every Jew that they could lay their hands on, based primarily on Nazi racial ideology. Now, there were many means of killing, not just gas chambers and crematoria. The movement, the Nazi movement, starts against its enemies in relatively small ways. Very early on, they established concentration camps. These were places where they would isolate, they'd arrest, isolate, and send enemies of the state, as they saw it, to be isolated from society. Concentration camps were characterized by physical abuse, disease, typhoid, typhus, you name it. Diseases were rampant, and they essentially had the prisoners on starvation diets. So the concentration camps, through neglect, was one means of killing thousands of individuals. Once the war started in 1939, there was special units of the SS known as Einsatzgruppen. There were 4 special units that followed behind the German armies, and their goal was to kill undesirables. Now, who represented an undesirable represents on what time and what place you're talking about. The most universal undesirable was someone of Jewish extraction, and tens of thousands of Jews in Poland, in Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and in the Soviet Union were killed by Einsatzgruppen. In Poland, anyone who was identified as an intellectual, professors, school teachers, musicians, were killed as well. And in the Soviet Union, they made a special effort to hunt down party members and commissars to be executed. So the Einsatzgruppen was another weapon in the arsenal that they used. Then they began to amass Jews in ghettos in various towns. The ghettos were incredibly overcrowded, and the overcrowding caused starvation and disease. There was, of course, constant physical abuse. If you attempted to escape from the ghetto, you would be summarily executed. and the ghettos represent just another tool in the arsenal. And finally, there were the extermination camps. The extermination camps were, in fact, industrial enterprises that were established to kill human beings. They were really factories of death. There would be immediate extermination for some, particularly the old and the young and the seriously ill. They would be almost automatically sent to the showers, which were the gas chambers. But then those who still had some physical strength would be worked. There were many, many German companies who had satellite factories near the concentration camps where workers from the camps would be sent, and they would work as slave labor in these satellite factories. So with the work there and the abuse and starvation, that also killed many of the others. And when they were used up by these tactics, they would then be sent to the chambers as well. So there were many, many means of killing. Now, there were 6 major extermination camps. Probably the most famous is Auschwitz, Birkenau here. There is Belzec, which is located in Poland. There's Kemlo, Majdanek, and Sobibor. All of these were located in territory that before the war was Poland. They did not occur on German soil. And the last, was Treblinka. So these were the major camps. The most famous, I believe, is Auschwitz-Birkenau. Auschwitz started in 1940 as a concentration camp to help subdue the Polish population. Anyone that German authorities, whether they were in the SS or they were in the regular police, they were in the Gestapo, or even the military, could identify people that they saw as potential troublemakers, and they'd be sent to one or another of the concentration camps, such as Auschwitz. The idea in Poland was to eliminate anyone that might be the nucleus for resistance to German domination of the Polish population. The Auschwitz-Birkenau camp was meant to be a model town at first for the settling of new German citizens in the East. But as a concentration camp, particularly after June 22nd, 1941, when the Germans invade Russia, the Soviet Union, as a concentration camp, it became a major source of labor. In the first months of the war, the Germans captured tens of thousands of Soviet prisoners of war, and so many so that they really did not have any idea what to do with them. Many of these prisoners were ill-fed, ill-housed, and were worked to death in places such as Auschwitz, Birkenau, and other places. But after Stalingrad, that is after the Soviets turned the tide in the war, the Soviet labor dried up and became replaced by Jewish labor. It became a camp for Jews, and tens of thousands of them were sent there. Finally, on July 4th, 1942, Himmler, head of the SS, ordered a building transformed into a gas chamber so that they could begin the systematic, and as the Nazis saw it, the orderly extermination of the Jews. I want you to have a sense of what things were like. And this is a statement by Rudolf Hess, who was one of the commandants of Auschwitz-Birkenau. We used Zyklon B, which was a crystallized prussic acid, which we dropped into the death chamber from a small opening. It took from 3 to 15 minutes to kill the people in the death chamber, depending on conditions. We knew the people were dead because their screaming stopped. After their bodies were removed, our special commandos took off the rings and extracted the gold from the teeth of the corpses, gold crowns, gold fillings, children of tender years were invariably exterminated, since by reason of their youth, they were unable to work. There is something absolutely frightening to me about the phrase children of tender years, and then talk about them being exterminated. Now, in fact, the Max Hellinger account was an account in the Reichsbank used to launder money and property of Jews. And I show you this. This is a tray containing gold crowns, gold fillings that had been extracted from those who were executed. And this is only a month's supply. It gives you a sense of how much, how many people suffered. Now, as we look at Jewish Holocaust deaths, you can see clearly that in every European country, the Jews suffered seriously, most especially in Poland, where virtually the entire Polish Jewish population was wiped out, heavily in Russia, Romania, in some areas such as France, many French Jews survived. In Italy, many French Jews survived. In Denmark, the Danes managed to smuggle out almost the entire Jewish population to Sweden, and most Jews from Denmark managed to survive. But it shows you what an incredible loss of life this represents. Now, there is no doubt that between 5 and 6 million Jews were killed. More than 3 million Soviet prisoners of war, more than 2 million Soviet civilians, more than 1 million Polish civilians, more than 1 million Yugoslav civilians, about 70,000 men, women, and children with mental and physical handicaps. In fact, this began well before the war, where they were trying to weed out of the population those they considered to be unfit and undesirable. More than 200,000 Roma or Gypsy were killed, and unknown numbers of political prisoners, resistance fighters, homosexuals, and deportees. All of these were victims of the Holocaust. Now, the cover-up of all of this began with the Nazis. The battle at Stalingrad was the turning point, and when the Soviet Union won at Stalingrad, their armies began a constant advance against the German occupiers. And as the Germans were forced to retreat, the Nazis attempted to destroy the evidence of what they'd done at Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. They tried to erase these sites from the earth. In 1943, in the middle of all of this, in a speech to SS generals, Himmler said that the mass murder of the European Jews will be kept secret, never to be recorded. That's what he wanted. That's what the Holocaust deniers would have us think. Finally, as the situation looked dimmer and dimmer for the Nazis, they created in 1944 the Action 1005 plan, and the facilities at Auschwitz and elsewhere to be destroyed, to eradicate their killing actions. If there were corpses buried at any of these places, the corpses were exhumed and burned, and they hoped that they could erase their crime. At Auschwitz, the job was incompletely done. In fact, after the war, a great deal was found to illustrate the Holocaust. Here are the crematoria, for example, at Majdanek. Bill Lawrence, who was a reporter for Time magazine, described Majdanek as a veritable river rouge for the production of death. And of course, coming from this area, we know he was talking about the great industrial location in Dearborn. So it was a veritable river rouge for the production of death. General Eisenhower made a point of visiting the camps. At Orduf, a subcamp of Buchenwald concentration camp. Now remember, the concentration camps are different than the extermination camps, but they still caused the death of thousands of people. Eisenhower wrote here was indisputable evidence of Nazi brutality and ruthless disregard of every shred of decency. He further said, I visited every nook and cranny of the camp because I felt it my duty to be in a position from then on to testify at firsthand about these things in case there ever grew up at home the belief or assumption that the stories of Nazi brutality were just propaganda. So no authority less than Dwight Eisenhower would attest to the Holocaust. At Auschwitz, after hurried attempts to erase the camp, the Russians found 38 warehouses had been burned to the ground, but 4 warehouses there were unburned. In those 4 warehouses, they had 300 and just under 350,000 men's suits, just over 800,000 women's garments, just under 14,000 carpets, 7 tons of human hair. They used the human hair in a variety of ways. They used it as stuffing for furniture. They also made socks for submariners out of the human hair. Something I can't imagine. I mean, I just can't imagine that. Who are you wearing today? There were many, many shoes, eyeglasses, toys, false teeth. What would they do with the false teeth? Toothbrushes. Is anyone going to want to use toothbrush? But nonetheless, they carried it. Now, immediately after the war, there was general acceptance that the Holocaust happened and that Jews were specially singled out as its victims. If we look at the period from 1945 to the early 1950s, 1950, 51, there was absolutely no doubt that the Holocaust was a reality. The evidence was clear and overwhelming. There were hundreds of thousands of written documents. One thing about the Germans is they were very systematic in their record keeping of the trains that were sent, the number of people who were on the trains, the productivity of the gas chambers and the crematoria. All of these were charted. The bills of sale for the crematoria, the gas chambers, all of this was found after the war. There, of course, were eyewitness accounts from the standpoint of survivors, sometimes eyewitness accounts from guards. There were photographs, some photographs taken secretly by the inmates of the camps themselves, other photographs taken by those who were the administrators and the jailers of these people. There were, in fact, the physical remains, as we saw at Majdanek and at Auschwitz, of the camps themselves. And then there's the inferential evidence from population demographics. Let me recall Poland. Poland lost nearly 3 million Jews. Where did these people go? They did not evaporate. They were killed in the camps. Now, one of the cruelest things the Nazi guards, some of the Nazi guards did, was taunting the Jewish victims. The SS guards took great pleasure in telling us we had no chance of coming out alive, a point they emphasized with particular relish by insisting after the war, the rest of the world would not believe what happened. And people would conclude that evil on such a scale was just not possible. Unfortunately, we have discovered in Bosnia and in Rwanda that in fact those sorts of evils continue to be possible. Now, Holocaust denial began in the 1950s and the 1960s, in the mid to late 1950s. One of the architects of it was this man here, Willis Carto. He was an anti-Semite himself. He held Jews in great contempt. He also believed in absolute government that would protect the US racial heritage. So what this really means is that not only was he anti-Semitic, but he was in fact a racist. He was a founder of the Liberty Lobby, which for the next 20 years will be a serious right-wing lobbying group in Washington. And he's the co-founder of the Institute for Historical Research. More about that later. Okay. But it wasn't just Americans who were deniers of the Holocaust. Paul Rassinier was a former prisoner at Buchenwald, and he insisted and claimed that the Holocaust could not have happened because there were no gas chambers at Buchenwald. But nobody ever claimed that there were gas chambers at Buchenwald. Buchenwald was not an extermination camp, but rather was a concentration camp. So you wouldn't expect to find them there. Robert Ferrisson, another Frenchman, was a lecturer in literary criticism. He argued that it was technically impossible for gas chambers to function as extermination chambers. But in fact, they functioned and functioned very effectively. There were numerous American deniers. One of the saddest stories is Harry Elmer Barnes. He was a respected historian. And in fact, one of his real contributions to historical research was he did great research on the impact of British propaganda on American opinion in the First World War, arguing forcefully and accurately that British propaganda helped bring America into the war on the British and French side. But after he found that, he saw everything as a conspiracy. You find one good conspiracy, I guess Mr. Barnes decided he could make a career of it. So he argued, for example, that Germany was the victim in the Second World War. They were invaded. In fact, what the Germans did was shoot Poles, dress them up in Polish army uniforms, dragged their corpses across the frontier, took pictures of them, claiming that they were the invaders. That has been debunked again and again and again. And he claimed that he was a victim of a plot to silence him. Again, very often people believe that if you do not agree with them, if you provide contrary evidence, you're part of a plot to silence you, as opposed to just trying to explore the truth. Here are two more. Austin App was a professor of English literature at LaSalle. He wrote The $6 Million Swindle, Blackmailing the German People for Hard Marks with Fabricated Corpses. His argument in his book was pretty straightforward, that in fact, the Jews, and particularly Jews in Israel, argued that 6 million Jews had been killed by the Nazi regime so that they could get war reparations from Germany, that it was all a big Ponzi scheme, in effect, a big fraud. Don't think so. Arthur Butts, who is an engineering professor at Northwestern, wrote a book entitled The Hoax of the 20th Century. And again, he Holocaust, the deaths, all of the documents were false. He literally argued that the Allies trained hundreds and hundreds of soldiers to falsify documents. And once they occupied Germany, they sent these hundreds and hundreds of soldiers into Germany to falsify German documents that would then be used to support the Holocaust. It seems extraordinarily elaborate. He did acknowledge that some Jews died, but not 6 million. Why would any of them be enough? Ernest Zundel is a German citizen living in Canada, and he is a publisher of neo-Nazi literature. His goal was to rehabilitate the German people, arguing that they have been painted with the brush of being genocides. Actually, I was in Germany about 3 years ago, and the German people deserve a great deal of credit for accepting their responsibility. At our time in Berlin, we visited the Holocaust Memorial there. It's one of the most moving sights you would want to see. In Nuremberg, there is a library preserving the German documents on which the Nazi regime and the Holocaust was based. So contemporary Germans have no problem accepting that in the past, their forefathers did some horrible things. He estimates the number killed in concentration camps was 300,000. Well, maybe, I mean, although that can be disputed. but he overlooks entirely the death camps, the extermination camps. In 1984, the Canadian government charged him with stimulating anti-Semitism through publication and dissemination of material he knew to be false. But to the Canadians' credit, his conviction was overturned by the Canadian Supreme Court on the basis of free speech grounds. In effect, the court said, yes, he's a liar, but he has a right to lie. David Irving, who we will meet in a little bit, said Zundel is a Nazi. There's no question about it. He's proud of it. And Irving was one of Zundel's friends. One of the interesting characters in all of this is Fred Luckter. He was featured in a film by Errol Morris. You may or may not be familiar with Errol Morris, but perhaps his most famous film was the Thin Blue Line. But he also did a program about Luckter. Luckter was a self-created execution expert. He simply started contacting states, arguing that he was an expert in the operation of electric chairs. And if they were having trouble with their electric chair, they could hire his services to repair or rehabilitate or just examine their electric chairs and make sure they were in appropriate working order. Ultimately, in court, he was forced to admit that he was not, nor had he ever been, a professional engineer, and that he fraudulently presented himself as such. He was paid $35,000 to testify at the aforementioned Zundel trial, and a Canadian judge ruled he hasn't any expertise, which I think says it all. But that didn't stop him from being a Holocaust denier, going, for example, to Auschwitz-Birkenau, against the regulations there, taking scrapings from bricks, bringing them back to his laboratory, and claiming that there was no evidence of prussic acid in the residue on the bricks. That has all been debunked by real scientific work. David Irving, who we are about to meet soon, later espouses the Luckter report as one of the major proofs that the Holocaust did not happen. The Institute for Historical Review was founded by Willis Carto and a fellow by the name of David McCalden, also known as Louis Brandon. I could not find out why he adopted an alias. And it has the veneer of academic respectability. That is, they publish a journal. But this journal is not a peer-reviewed journal. The gold standard in science, in history, in sociology, in any academic journal is that the articles, before they are published, are reviewed by peers who check them for factual truth, among other things. And so you can write anything you want for the Institute of Historical Review. In 1980, they made the mistake of offering a $50,000 challenge for proof that Jews were gassed at Auschwitz. A man by the name of Mel Mermelstein from Chicago provided that evidence, and ultimately a court ordered the Institute for Historical Review to pay the $50,000 plus $40,000 for personal suffering. So Mermelstein was able to prove in an American court that there were Jews gassed at Auschwitz. Now, what are the goals of the deniers? They want to absolve the Nazis by claiming that they never had an annihilation plan and that annihilation was technically impossible. Those Jews that were killed for justifiable reasons. They were spies, saboteurs, partisans, criminals, victims of legal reprisals. And I wonder about that phrase, legal reprisals. It seems to me that any reprisal isn't legal. They trace what they call this hoax to Jewish leaders, the State of Israel, and Jewish scholars. They assert that the plan of the Nazis was to have Jewish emigration to Madagascar. Well, what if we suggested every American of Irish descent be sent to Madagascar? And Jews were by this time a largely urban people. Do you think you could make a living on Madagascar? Even if you saw that as a goal, was it really a plausible goal? And they argued no Jews were gassed in concentration camps, none at Auschwitz. The fact that Jewish scholars disagree on the numbers killed show there is no proof. It means that they are taking the databases available and they are coming up with different conclusions. It seems to me that the disagreements shows the honesty of the attempt to accurately get an account of those who were killed. And they simply argue there was no proof of the Holocaust. Now, there is ample evidence of the Nazi regime attacking Jews and wishing their death. It starts literally 2 months after the Nazis took control by having a national boycott of Jewish businesses on April 1st. By April 7th, Jewish were outlawed, from the civil service. May 10th, there was a book burning of all books written by Jews. Jewish doctors could only treat Jewish patients. By 1935, you have the Nuremberg race laws. This forbid marriage or intercourse between Jews and non-Jews. Only those of German or related blood were citizens. That meant that that Jews were not citizens, had no civil protections in German society whatsoever. By 1938, after the shooting of a consular official in Paris, a man by the name of von Raum, who unfortunately was an anti-Nazi, it appears, there was widespread rioting all across Germany. 267 synagogues were destroyed. More than 7,000 shops were damaged or destroyed. 30,000 Jews were arrested and sent to concentration camps. Then there is the Wannsee Conference. This was held on January 20th, 1942. And it was called by Reinhard Heydrich, who is director of the Reich Main Security Office of the SS. Heydrich was also known as Hangman Heydrich. The aim was to ensure cooperation of administrative leaders of various departments in the implementation of the final solution to the Jewish question. So this is the final solution. And the final solution, of course, was the eradication of European Jewry. This was to replace the various ad hoc actions, such as the Einsatzgruppen. They were just not thorough enough. And there is some evidence that the strain of killing thousands and thousands of people was very telling on the Einsatzgruppen soldiers. They used vague terminology to mask their criminal acts. They used dog whistles to use phrases that were known to the insiders and what they meant, but seemed on the surface to be not important. The idea was to deport all the Jews to the general government area and then to kill them in those 6 camps. Now, one of the scholars who tackled all of this denial was Deborah Lipstad. She wrote Denying the Holocaust in 1993, and she, in effect, called out these Holocaust deniers. Now, she denies their tactics, their ideas, their motives. And one of those that she debunked was David Irving. In 1996, Irving filed suit. He was a British subject in Britain against Lipstad and her publisher, Penguin Books. He was asking for damages from each defendant, that is from Lipstad individually and personally, and Penguin Books. And he also was asking that Penguin destroy all the remaining copies of the books. Now, this is a younger David Irving. He is a British writer and Nazi apologist. He has no degree in history, although, Herodotus, the father of history, had no degree in history either. But in any event, he claims that he is not a denier, but he speaks at the Institute for Historical Research conferences. He speaks at denier groups, and he speaks at pro-Nazi groups. His first book, The Destruction of Dresden, was at first lauded when it was published in 1963, talking about the massive Allied air raid that incinerated the city of Dresden. But it now appears that his estimate of the numbers who have died there, are anywhere from 3 to 5 times the actual number who did it. His Hitler's War in 1997 was fairly well received. And his big coup was in 1993 when Der Spiegel, a German magazine, published what they thought were Hitler's personal diaries. David Irving challenged in a press conference the reality of that, and in fact was ultimately proven correct that the Hitler's diaries were a massive forgery. Now, there was preparation for the trial. In British law, a libel defendant had to prove that the statements made were true. That is, in American law, all you have to do is prove a lack of malice in your statements. Your statements can, in fact, be false. But if you did not state them with malice, then you can get off. But in British law, you have to prove that they are true. The trial would be held in London, and Penguin decided to defend Deborah Lipstad. Now, I am forever grateful to Penguin Books for doing this, because the simple thing for them to do would have been to reach some small monetary settlement with Irving, destroy the books, but they took a stand for the freedom of thought, and they hired one of the best barristers in England, Richard Rampton, to defend them. Lipstad, as another defendant, needed her own lawyer, and she hired as her lawyer Julius Irving. Irving would later go on to be attorney for Lady Diana, so he was obviously a pretty skilled attorney. Irving decided to serve as his own counsel because no one knows this material better than I do. And it was heard before Judge Charles Gray. Now, as part of the trial preparation, there was extensive discovery. Lipstad's attorneys, Penguin's attorneys, could go through literally decades of what Irving published, wrote, spoke, and so there's that. And they also hired expert witnesses. And here you see a list of the expert witnesses. In an English court, the duty of the expert witness is to the court and not to the person who hires them. So these are people presumably as neutral as you can find. Okay, so the trial begins. This is Richard Rampton. This is Lipstad. This is David Irving. This is Julius. And here is the judge. Okay, so the first witness, major witness, was Robert Jan Van Pelt, a Dutch author, architectural historian, professor at the University of Waterloo and the University of Toronto. His job was to look into whether or not there were death camps. And he produced a 700-page report definitively proving the existence of gas chambers and crematoria at Auschwitz-Birkenau. No longer should that be an issue of any dispute whatsoever. Okay. Christopher Browning, a British historian, documented the planned and systematic program of extermination of the Einsatzgruppen in the East. His book on the topic, Ordinary Men, Reserve Police Battalion 101, and the Final Solution in Poland, is riveting reading. And it's riveting for a number of things, including the fact that some men refused to participate in these killings. They simply walked away and were never chastised for that. So Christopher Browning was another important witness. Richard Evans, one of the great modern historians of the Nazi era, author of a 3-volume history, for example, of the Third Reich, among other works, said this: not one of Irving's books, speeches, or articles, not one paragraph, not one sentence in any of them can be taken on trust as an accurate representation of its historical subject. All of them are completely worthless as history because Irving cannot be trusted anywhere in any of them to give a reliable account of what he is talking or writing about. If we mean by historian someone who is concerned to discover the truth about the past and to give as accurate a representation of it as possible, then Irving is not a historian. I know of no more damning denunciation than that. The judgment finally came on April 11th, 2001. The judge issued a 300-page opinion. In that opinion, he said, among other things, falsification of the historical record was deliberate and motivated by a desire to present events in a manner consistent with his own ideological beliefs, even if that involved distortion and manipulation of the historical evidence. Irving has, for his own ideological reasons, persistently and deliberately misrepresented and manipulated historical evidence. That for the same reasons he has portrayed Hitler in an unwarrantedly favorable light, principally in relation to his attitude towards and responsibility for the treatment of the Jews. That he is an active Holocaust denier, that he is anti-Semitic and racist, and that he associates with white right-wing extremists who promote neo-Nazism. Therefore, the defense of justification succeeds. It follows that there must be a judgment for the defendants. That is, the Judge Gray found that in Penguin Books and Deborah Lipstad were in fact not guilty, that they had in fact told the truth. So why did the court work so well? Well, the court worked very well because it was an effective forum. Questions had to be answered. Irving was on the stand himself. He was cross-examined. His attempts to evade answers hurt his case. Evidence was necessary to support the points either side made. It was not good enough just to make assertions. You had to back up those assertions with hard evidence. And Irving, we should remember, was the one that was trying to suppress free speech. He wanted all of the copies that Penguin still had of Lipstad's book to be destroyed. He is the suppressor of free speech. Yet, Holocaust denial continues, and it continues to flourish. It is tragically widespread in Arab countries. There are deniers throughout the United States and Europe. Iranian former President Ahmadinejad said, "They have created a myth in the name of the Holocaust and consider it above God, religion, and the prophets," in an address that was carried live in Iran on state television. And if you look at this chart of awareness of the Holocaust, if we look at this area, and MENA says means Middle East and North Africa, 38% of the people in that region are not aware of the Holocaust, and only 8% of those believe it is adequately described in history. If we look at Western Europe, 94% have heard of the Holocaust. 77% think that it's accurately described. In the United States, 77% have heard of it, only 55%, and I view that as a tragedy, really. See it as accurately described by history. All of this comes at a cost, not just for history or historians, but for all of us. It is an attack on all history and the future, it is an attack on all history and the way we transmit the past to the future. They are distorting the truth. They invite others to distort the truth. If in fact Holocaust deniers can do this, then any group, any ideology can make up their own facts, can make up their own actions, and justify whatever they want. You are entitled to your opinion. I have no problem with that. But you may not invent your own facts. And the physical reality of Auschwitz is one of those facts. Does this matter? Democratic society is continually threatened by such an abandonment of reason and regression to mythical modes of thought and behavior. This encourages pseudo-history, or the denial of the past for present political or ideological reasons. Holocaust deniers are not just the other side of a debate. It's not listening to another point of view. It's listening to a fabrication. It is a myth. It is, more simply, a lie. Maybe Lipstad put it best when she wrote, "If Holocaust denial has demonstrated anything, it is the fragility of memory, truth, reason, and history." And this concludes my presentation. I do want to show you Lipstad's book of History on Trial. She wrote her account of the trial. Richard Evans also wrote a book about the trial, lying about Hitler. Both of them are excellent books, by the way. And there is a PBS dramatization. It's very hard to find. It's a VHS format. It's available at the University of Michigan. At least that's where I found it. It's a very interesting document. So as I said, this concludes my presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, I have one question for you.
Sure.
Is there any offshoots of these deniers that just say that Hitler didn't know anything about the Holocaust, even though they were going on?
Yeah, that is one of the attempts to exonerate Hitler. There is a school of deniers say, well, yes, his underlings did these things, but Hitler never intended them. But what you find is, from Mein Kampf onward, Hitler is anti-Semitic and is at the heart of all of the actions to marginalize and to destroy the citizenship of Jews in Germany. So it's not a credible defense for Hitler.
Very good.
I had absolutely no idea about the Jewish immigration to Madagascar.
Oh, isn't that remarkable? And in effect, what they intended to do was just sort of drop them on a beach.
Oh my goodness.
And Madagascar is not one of the richest ecological environments on the planet. It's not.
Absolutely not.
So, yes, it was very, very curious.
And human hair being used for socks.
Oh, yeah. The story was that it was the warmest material they could make the socks out of. Kept their feet warmer.
Wow.
I can't speak to I don't want to conduct any experiments so that I could speak to the truth or the falsity of that idea.
Just disturbing.
It is disturbing. But, pulling the teeth out of their heads, the crowns and the fillings and, just the lying.
So I'm going to admit this is a topic that I did not really hear about until I was in my mid-20s.
Sure. Yeah.
It was late for me too.
But I tell you, as I said in the presentation, when I was in Germany, what you find is the current generation accepts what happened. If you look at the immediate post-war generation, they tended to be into a great deal of denial, but this generation is willing to own the crimes of their grandfathers and acknowledge them and attempt to do what they can to appease for them, which I think is much to their credit. Until I went to Germany, I had a far different view of contemporary Germans, but it was eye-opening for me.
So there are no deniers in Germany?
Oh, sure there are. Unfortunately, there's even a neo-Nazi movement in Germany. But in Germany, they don't have the absolute freedom of speech we do. So you can't really, give speeches praising Hitler and so on and so forth. But there are anti-Semitic groups, and there are Nazi sympathizers. It seems that many of them tend to come out of the former East Germany, and it could in part be a function of poverty, economic poverty.
When you were in Germany, did you visit some of the camps?
No, I didn't have a chance, but I did visit the archives in Nuremberg. I actually got to see the field where they held the huge rallies, and we went to the Holocaust Memorial and the Holocaust Museum in Berlin. Berlin is a wonderful town for museums. They have one of the gates from the city of Babylon from 2,500 years ago. Yeah, I saw your eyes flash. It was just astonishing. It's entirely reconstructed. You walk as if you're entering the Babylon 2,500 years ago. It's just awe-inspiring, wonderful. And they also have a completely perfect Greco-Roman temple in a huge building. I mean, the building's the size of an airplane hangar, and here you see this temple reconstructed inside it. Just wonderful stuff. Plus great art museums. But anyway, you can guess what my wife and I do when we're on vacation.
It'd be fascinating to check out Gutenberg's Bible and old illuminated text. And
oh, for that, yeah, I can understand that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
Dennis, for those who will be watching the recording, if they have any questions, do you have like an email they could contact you?
Sure, you have my email, I believe.
Yeah.
Why don't they give you the questions and you forward it to me, and I will forward my answers back. How's that sound?
That sounds good.
Okay. Just in case there's somebody who doesn't agree with it, I don't want someone who is hostile.
Oh, I understand. Yeah.
Have my email address.
Have you ever, when you've given this speech before, have you ever had anyone in the audience not agree with what you were saying? No, I mean, not that I know of. The only time I had someone walk out was I was doing a presentation on Islam, and someone halfway through walked out on it. But what I tell them is that I am approaching the topic as a historian, not as a believer, not as a believer of Islam, not as a believer of Christianity. I'm looking at the historical context in which this faith grew. So that's about the only time I had someone walk out. That's okay. If you don't ruffle a few feathers, you're probably not doing your job.
So when you are presenting via Zoom, are you able to watch people's reactions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very helpful.
I was curious if you're just focused on your notes or looking at
only
people.
Only 4 or 5 people, but it's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like doing that. I like seeing them.
So I have your list of presentations in front of me that Rob provided. Which one is your favorite one to present?
I decided when I started teaching world history that I wasn't going to have any favorites, because one, if you have favorites, that begins to expand and expand and expand. And you'll only like teaching your favorite, and you'll be irritated if you have to teach the other stuff. So I decided I couldn't afford to have favorites. So actually, I'll be honest with you. There are 1 or 2 presentations I created that I didn't care to do again, and they're not on the list.
Okay. So
I enjoy all of them. I really enjoy doing the series on World War I. It's a four-parter. And what I enjoy doing is thinking up the titles. Like, I like The Shot That Killed Millions. I thought that was a good title for the beginning of the war. You know, one man, the archly killed, but millions will die as a result.
Okay, well,
I like, go ahead.
no, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dennis.
I like who you calling crazy. I thought that was, you know. But yeah, I like them all, or I won't do them. You know.
Well, I plan on having you come back for some of these other talks.
Well, thank you. I would appreciate the opportunity, and you know, if it ever happens that we're live again, I would appreciate the opportunity to do it live.
I'm sure we will be.
Thank you both for your help, your technical assistance.
Well, thank you very much for doing it.
Knowing there were two people out there, that was good.
I took notes. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, stay on as we stop the recording.
Sure.